Welcome to Season 1, Episode 3 of the Living for Today podcast, where we will explore the boundaries between reality and spirituality. I'll be your host, Ryan Kurczak. In today's episode, I will be talking with Karen White, an entrepreneur and astrologer, about the top 10 characteristics of a happy, loving relationship. I trust you'll enjoy it. Okay, welcome, Karen. Thank you for being here with me today.
Well, thank you for inviting me. This is fun.
Yeah, and you know the reason why I asked you here, but just for our audience who's listening at home, Karen White is a good friend of mine. She's a colleague of mine, and like me, she has been in successful long-term relationships. And in her life, she had also been married before, and her spouse had passed away as well. And did he have cancer? What did he pass away from, Karen?
Esophageal cancer. And it's spread to the rest of his body. So.
Okay. Yeah. So Karen and I have some similar understanding about relationships, which is what we're going to be talking about. And the reason I wanted her here is because in my own life, while I did have a good, wonderful, fantastic 22 to 23 year long relationship, there was a lot of that relationship, certain things that I had done or not done or was not mature enough to understand, that caused me some regret after Melissa passed. And because of that, I had talked to some of my friends, and a lot of them were asking me, well, what did you learn? What is it that you regret? What is it that you would do differently? And the more I thought about it, there were numerous things. Now, I wanted to share them, and I wanted to have my perspective, but I also wanted to have Karen's perspective on this, because she is also now in a very good, supportive, loving relationship. And in my mind, if you're going to learn something about anything, it's best if you learn it from someone who is successful at that which you want to know. So what we decided to do after talking about this was come up with our top 5 things, our top 5 points that we thought, after having successful relationships and going through great loss in relationships, what is the most valuable thing? What is the most important thing such that one can have a successful relationship, and that while they're going through the relationship, they don't come out of it with regrets. Or at least as few as possible. And that when they get to the end of the road, maybe they'll look back and see, what a rich, wonderful time we had together, walking together. So this is why I brought Karen here, because I know that she has some insights into these things. So before we get into our list of the top 5 things that we each have, do you have anything to add to that little introduction, Karen, or should we just jump in?
That's probably good.
Okay, great. Yeah. So when I was thinking about this, one of the things that came up for me after Melissa passed was we had a fantastic relationship, and I think most of our friends and family would think about that as well. But there was one particular theme that kind of threaded through our relationship that I've heard other people talk about as well. When people write to me, when they want to get an astrological session, and Karen's also an astrologer, and as you can imagine, most of the time astrologers get asked things about relationships. There's always this idea of, how can I find a partner that will understand me, and that I will understand? Yeah. And I do believe that Melissa and I understood each other fairly well, but there was a wide range of things that I think as a male, I could not understand about her being a female. Right. And I think there was a number of things that her being a female could not understand about me. And that was just gender oriented. There are other aspects too. And what I recognized was, after spending all that time with Melissa, after taking care of her through all the chemotherapy and bone marrow transplant, and her parents helped out a lot with that, what I recognized was it does not matter if I understood her at all. What mattered was that I loved her, and that whatever I did, it was to be an act of love, to support her. I didn't have to understand her. And so my top kind of regret that prompted this is not having spent more time during those 23 years that we were together, just simply appreciating her for who she was, loving her even though I didn't understand her. And so I'm curious, from your perspective, Karen, have you found that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh my God. That's like the one thing that I say all the time. And that is that acceptance is more important than understanding.
Right.
Because understanding is limited.
Right.
I mean, how much can we really understand another person when we can hardly understand ourselves?
Yeah, I barely understand me.
Exactly. And it's so funny, though. That was the first thing I wrote down when I was thinking about the 5, things. And, of course, I didn't follow directions.
Right.
7.
Oh, you've got 7. That's fine. Well, if we just shared the same one, then that doesn't count.
Yeah.
You can't take mine.
Right. So I just put it a different way, which was to not assume that your partner is like you. And then there's like the differences in the sexes. I mean, that alone is huge.
Right.
I mean, it's so huge that there are people who dedicated their lives to studying the brain differences between the brain science between men and women. And there's a lot there. It's huge. And I really like the differences between men and women. And the more I learn, the more I like men. I like them exactly the way they are. They're awesome. Seriously.
What, we can understand that for maybe the things that we had gone through in regards to relationship. But, in your own work, again, as we mentioned, you are an astrologer. And if you want to learn more about Karen, you can go to divinetimeastrology.com. But have you found any way to share that with people? I mean, I've tried to talk to people and say, look, quit thinking about finding the person who's going to understand you. Quit thinking about finding the person who's going to get you. Find someone that you get along well enough that you can just simply love unconditionally and let them live their lives. Have you found a way to be able to communicate that to people in a useful way?
Yeah, pretty much. I had a client recently who she was like, okay, where's this going? Where's this going? And so I asked her, I said, well, how is it going now? She said, well, it's really good. I said, and you spend enough time together, you're emotionally satisfied? She goes, yeah. And when you're together, it's easy and pretty much, and you have fun. And she goes, yeah. And I said, well, why not just be there now then? Just enjoy it the way it is and not, start causing problems because the future isn't here yet.
Right.
And it was one of those situations where, the energy is a little bit reversed. And so her process is faster than his. And so I just keep reminding her of that. You're ready before he is. And you can't push that. You can't push it. Just be there. Don't be in such a hurry to get this thing that you think you need when you're having a good time now.
Well, I still think that we should be able to try to get someone on a schedule where we say if we're leaving at 8 o'clock, you actually leave at 8 o'clock. Is that still something I shouldn't be trying to focus on?
No, that's something different. That's altogether different. And so, and sometimes when people, relationships do have a trajectory. They do need to grow or they die. That's true. But our pace is different at times. And even when the energy is going in the so-called right direction, where the man is the masculine naturally, just because of where the moons are from each other, it still doesn't mean that everything's going to be the way you want it when you want it.
Right.
So, but is it good enough for now? Are you enjoying yourself? That's kind of what I say. I think maybe I've kind of forgot your question.
Well, the idea, now I've forgotten it too. Let me look at my notes. Oh, right. How do you, how do you get that across to someone that you don't have to understand your partner? And, or, that's even another thing. Why is it that we feel we have to understand the other person?
Well,
You know what I mean?
I do. And one of the things that a man can say to a woman that really frustrates her is, I just don't understand why you feel that way. Which is another way of saying, I don't think you should feel that way.
Exactly.
And because I don't feel that way, I wouldn't feel that way. Well, no, probably you wouldn't, because you're not me. Right. So that's why I think acceptance is more important than understanding.
Well, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter if you understand why someone feels a certain way.
Yeah, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Because that person may not know. They
exactly.
May not be able to say, well, I feel this way because exactly this is the reason why.
Well, on the other end of that too, kind of going along with some of the longer range views within this podcast is, oftentimes, like you said, an individual doesn't understand why they feel a certain way. I mean, it can be a trigger from a past relationship or a trigger from a childhood experience that comes up. And, when you're in a relationship with someone and they're feeling a certain way, and then all of a sudden you come in and say, as you mentioned, well, I don't understand, which translates into, you don't need to be feeling that way. In a sense, you're missing the bigger picture of, wow, this person's having an experience. I don't know why. They may or may not know why, but what actually matters is that they are having that experience, and how can I be there with them in that experience?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I think curiosity is important.
And on a more day-to-day level, one of the reasons this came up for me, Melissa and I didn't really have a whole lot of differences in philosophy and understanding about things, but the little things in our day-to-day life would be different. For example, I remember it would drive me crazy whenever she would want to fall asleep, and she loved the show Friends. And she would fall asleep like always watching Friends. And I would think to myself, why do you always have to fall asleep, with connected to your earphones or something like that? And I remember one of the people in the meditation group, the online meditation course that I have, his wife, he was younger, probably in his early 20s, maybe mid 20s, but his wife loved to do things like go antique shopping or going out and doing just what he called or thought were sort of like frivolous things which were kind of a waste of time. And when he told me about that, this was after Melissa had been sick and might have been after she passed. But I told him, I said, look, man, that doesn't matter. I'm like, if she's your wife and you love her and she wants to go antique shopping with her. Just if this is someone that you truly love and someone that is a meaningful part of your life, if they like doing something you don't, just go do it to be with them. Just appreciate what they're doing, So part of this was, in my mind, trying to encourage people to let go of these maybe little petty things that they hyper focus on that will actually prevent them from appreciating how good a relationship really is.
Yeah. Exactly.
Do you find that to be the case when you talk to people, that they do a lot of that? Yeah, because I think that we have the curse of the ideal relationship in our heads. Right. I think that's caused more problems than anything else. I mean, even in astrology, it's like, okay, if you have these things between each other astrologically, then you've got a perfect relationship. Well, I really wish we wouldn't even say things like that, because I've never ever seen that. Right. There's always something that's not perfect. And when you're in a relationship so that you can be influenced by that person. Right. Because you want to experience their world too, not just your own ideas about what it should be like to be with that person, because then you're just in a relationship with yourself. Right. So, you know what I mean? It's just, you just have to be curious and see, okay, why do you like that so much? Right. Or even if he doesn't know why, it's like, okay, tell me about it. Yeah. Yeah, because we don't know how we're going to grow. That's sort of the thing. When I look back, I would never have thought that I would have thought about, known about, considered many of the things that I learned by being in a relationship with a person who was did have quite a lot of fundamental differences than I did, so I think you're right there. It's important to remember that this is a process of growing, and in a sense you're influencing each other. You're growing together into something else,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
So that would be my number one, and obviously it was one of yours too. So I'm going to go to you and give you a chance. What is something on your list that came up?
Well, I think that education is so important. I believe in education.
Okay.
And I think that you should educate yourself on, if you're straight, educate yourself on the opposite sex.
Okay.
Or at least on the yin and yang principles, how they're different. And I've made a study of relationships probably since I was 16.
Mm-hmm.
And, okay, what was I going to say? Oh, and even now I'm learning new stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So as people learn more, like based on the brain science and stuff, well, I learn it too.
Right.
I thought it was like, okay, so I know everything and pretty much about it now, right?
Right.
No. I was listening to a lecture by Alison Armstrong, a woman who studies brains, research on the differences between men and women. And she perfectly explained a fight that I had just had with my husband the day before.
Mm-hmm.
And it was only because I didn't understand something about his gender. That's it.
Okay.
That was all it was. It wasn't as nowhere near as personal as I thought it was.
Right.
It was just because he's a guy.
Well, so in that idea, you don't have to tell what the fight was about, but like what was the quality that, because he was of the male gender, that caused the difficulty in understanding there? Like what was
because he was doing something differently than the way I would do it.
Okay.
And he does it, and I found out that's the way men do things.
Okay.
I think what it is it has to do with his ability to determine whether or not something is worth his energy.
Right.
And, because I'm female, we try to do a lot of different things. Like we're always doing a bunch of little stuff all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And what I didn't realize was that doing those little things all the time is rebuilding my female hormones.
Okay.
But when men sit and they seem to be being lazy and doing nothing, is when they're rebuilding their hormones, their testosterone.
Right.
So now once I understood that, now I'm concerned to make sure that he gets enough of the flickering flame, sitting in front of the campfire thing, where he's basically resting and waiting until there was a problem that's big enough to get up and solve.
Right.
You see what I mean? Just because I think it's important in that moment doesn't mean that it's efficient.
So he was being lazy, and you thought that was the wrong thing to do.
I think, yeah, I guess so. I don't know if I would use that word. So that word has crossed my mind.
Yeah.
At various times. Or he's lazy because, hey, he doesn't think that this is important as I do.
Right.
But when it really is important, then he takes care of it.
Right.
And I love the way he takes care of it. I can count on him.
We had a conversation similar to this before, and I don't remember whether it was when we were over at Ernst's in Arizona or if we had just done a video on it. But I remember talking about this idea of, like, when it comes to kind of dealing with the opposite sex, that oftentimes it's really good for women to feel like cherished in a way. Like, so if you're, I guess you're in a heterosexual relationship, for women to feel cherished, so the man does things to contribute to that feeling. Mm-hmm. And that one of the things on the other side of it that men seem to respond well to is having a sense of being trusted or respected. Is that accurate? Did we talk about that before, or is that something else?
I think we have to some extent. Yeah,
okay.
It totally is. And that's just goes back to the thing where I think that the number one thing is to not assume that your partner is like you.
Right.
and that they have the same needs, and they experience love the same way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What they want can be completely different than what you want,
Right.
what you think you need anyway. And I think that the differences between the men and women come into that in a big way. Because I remember my first husband, the one who passed away, one time he actually said to me, he says, sometimes you just say the wrong thing. And I was like, well, educate me, please. Tell me,
Right.
what did you say? And he wasn't really able to do that. And that was frustrating because I didn't want to do it again,
Mm-hmm.
But it really alerted me to the fact that, book learning is one thing, but experiential learning is another thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you really want your partner to be able to feel safe to tell you, well, when you said that thing, it made me feel like you didn't respect me, or whatever it was. I'm sure that that's what it came down to.
Right.
Because I know what my intentions were.
Mm-hmm.
My intentions were not to do anything like that.
Well, yeah.
You know what I mean? So that just leads to another thing I wanted to say, which was to assume the best of your partner.
Okay.
Assume that they're not, some psychopath who's trying to gaslight you, and
Right.
that they're after you, and that they mean you any ill. And just assume that they're maybe just not able to express themselves, or they're not understanding something, or they didn't hear you, they're trying to do something good, but they're not doing it in a way that you can understand, because it really makes a big difference to assume the best, to give them the benefit of the doubt.
I completely agree with that. But then I start thinking about women I've known who have really been in relationships with some
Yeah, well,
sociopathic people.
I
So
know
how
I'm
do you
talking
tell the
about
difference between the two?
the different. Well, I'm talking about normal neurotics.
Okay, normal
I think what
neurotics.
most of us are. We're normal neurotics. I'm not talking about the
Constant.
I'm not talking about the small majority of, well, not the small majority, but the people who are, what is it, pathological.
Right.
They're on a further down the scale.
Well, I guess the way I would look at that is, so for example, if you're in a relationship with someone and you kind of scroll back or look back to the majority of your experiences, if say 9 out of 10 of them were normal and didn't seem out of the ordinary, but then you get one where there's you are either confused, or you are offended, or you don't feel respected, or you feel hurt in some way, that maybe what you're saying is, instead of jumping to the conclusion that they're maliciously out to get you for some reason, stop
Right.
and maybe try to figure out why did that happen, or try to figure out an underlying cause, rather than jumping to a conclusion that they're really out to get you in a way.
Yeah, don't assume that.
Right. But
Don't assume that.
if it's
Now,
pathological, I mean, it happens repeatedly. See, that's
different.
yeah, that's why I want to talk about that, because I think there are plenty of people that, they have those relationships where 2 out of 10 times things are good, but the other 8 it's not, and they focus on the 2 out of 10 rather than
Yeah.
the other 8. So, but right now we're talking about those situations where it's 1 out of 10 times, right?
Where it's just like more and more of a normal, like you get along like 99% of the time.
Right.
And every now and then you have this big World War III kind of argument.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
And and then afterwards you're like, what was that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting too, because in the heat of the moment when you're really upset, you don't have the ability to see really what's going on. It's not until afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
and you see it.